At 4:27 p.m. on September 27, 1969, Sergeant Ray Morrison crouched in waist-high elephant grass near the Nui May Tao massif in Khanh Province, listening to the unmistakable crack of AK-47 rounds cutting through the jungle canopy above his head. His five-man SAS patrol had been compromised. 40 meters behind him, Private David Fisher worked the radio, his voice steady despite the situation, calling for extraction, while Viet Cong voices echoed through the trees, getting closer. Morrison had 3 grenades, maybe 20 rounds left in his L1A1 rifle, and a decision to make. They could try to break contact and run, buying themselves another hour, maybe 2. Or they could hold this position and pray the helicopters from 9 Squadron RAF arrived before the enemy did. In the next 8 minutes, that prayer would be answered by 2 Iroquois pilots who would attempt something that violated every safety protocol in the manual, but would become legend among men who operated in the shadows. The Australian Army Training Manual designated 6 approved methods for emergency patrol extraction. What happened in the next few minutes wasn't one of them. Ray Morrison grew up in Bendigo, Victoria, where his father had worked the goldfields until the mines played out in the 1950s. The Morrison family moved to Melbourne when Ray was 12, settling in Footscray, where his father found work at the Newport Railway Workshops. Ray was the eldest of 4 boys, the one who spent weekends hiking the Dandenongs instead of playing football, the one who could read a map before he could drive a car, and the one who knew from age 15 that he wanted to serve. At 17, he tried to enlist. Too young? At 18, the day after his birthday, in January 1964, he walked into the recruiting office in Russell Street. The recruiter looked at his build, 6 feet tall, lean, fit from working construction jobs, and asked if he'd considered the infantry. Morrison said he'd considered the SAS. The recruiter laughed. "Nobody just walks into the SAS, son. You earn your way there." Morrison earned it. Basic training at Puckapunyal, infantry training at Singleton. 2 years with 1 RAR learning how to be a soldier. Then, in 1966, he volunteered for SAS selection. The 3-week course at Swanbourne nearly broke him. Forced marches across the West Australian desert carrying 60 pounds. Navigation tests with deliberately faulty maps. Interrogation resistance training that left him questioning whether he'd made the right choice. 73 men started the course, 19 finished. Morrison was one of them. He made corporal in 1967, sergeant by early 1968, and by September 1969 he was a patrol commander with 3 Squadron on his 2nd tour in Vietnam. He'd led 14 patrols without losing a man. The 15th patrol would test everything he'd learned. The mission briefing had been routine. 5-man patrol, 7 days in the field, area of operations 35 kilometers northeast of Nui Dat near the Cambodian border. Intelligence suggested Viet Cong units were using the Nui May Tao area as a staging point for attacks into Nui Province. The patrol's job was simple: observe, record, report. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Stay invisible. The patrol consisted of Morrison as commander, Private David Fisher as second-in-command and signaller, Corporal Terry Walsh as scout, Private Michael Chen as medic, and Private John Davies as tail-end Charlie. Good men, all of them. Fisher was on his first tour, but proved himself steady under pressure. Walsh had been with Morrison on 6 previous patrols. Chen was from Sydney. Parents had emigrated from Shanghai in the 1950s, spoke Mandarin and some Vietnamese. Useful when you're trying to interpret enemy radio chatter. Davies was from Perth, an original sandgroper who'd grown up hunting in the Western Australian bush. The patrol inserted by helicopter on September 21, 1969, landing at dusk in a clearing 3 kilometers from their patrol area. Standard procedure: walk away from your insertion point, establish a lying-up position, wait until full dark, then move to your operational area under cover of night. They moved through the jungle like ghosts. SAS doctrine emphasized stealth over speed. A 5-man patrol in enemy territory survived by being invisible, by moving through the bush so carefully that even the birds didn't notice them passing. The first 3 days were textbook. They established an observation post overlooking a trail junction and documented enemy movement. September 22nd, 16 Viet Cong moving northeast, carrying supplies. September 23rd, 23 VC, mixed unit. Some looked like main force regulars, weapons in good condition, moving with purpose. September 24th, another group, this time 30+, and something about them made Morrison uneasy. They weren't just moving through. They were scouting, looking for something. On September 25th, it rained. Not the brief afternoon showers common in late September, but solid, relentless rain that turned the jungle floor into mud and made every step treacherous. Morrison pulled the patrol back from their observation post to a more defensible position on slightly higher ground. The rain was good for concealment, but bad for everything else. Radio communication became spotty. Gear got wet. Sleep became impossible. They huddled under their ponchos and waited for the weather to break. September 26th, the rain continued. Morrison made the decision to move. They'd been in the same area for 5 days. That was pushing their luck. SAS patrols typically moved every 2 to 3 days to avoid pattern recognition by the enemy. But the rain made movement risky. Visibility was down to 50 meters. Sound carried differently in the rain. You could walk into an enemy patrol and not know it until you were face to face. They moved anyway. Morrison led them northeast, trying to find better observation points, trying to stay ahead of that nagging feeling that something wasn't right. At 1400 hours on September 26th, Walsh froze mid-step, hand signal, enemy 30 meters ahead, 4 Viet Cong moving single file along a trail, AK-47 slung, not expecting contact. The patrol melted into the jungle, 5 men becoming invisible in the green. The VC walked past, oblivious. Morrison counted to 100, then 200, before signaling the patrol to continue moving. But now he knew they were inside the enemy's operational area, and that changed everything. They found a new position on a small rise with good visibility and established another observation post. September 20th, late afternoon, more enemy movement, a lot more. Morrison counted over 60 VC moving through their area in groups of 10 to 15. This wasn't just a transit route. This was a staging area. He radioed base, provided coordinates, enemy strength estimates, movement patterns. Base acknowledged. Good intelligence. Continue observing. Morrison didn't like it. Too many enemy, too close together, too much activity. The hair on the back of his neck was standing up. That sixth sense that combat veterans develop, the one that keeps them alive. He told Fisher to prepare a message requesting early extraction. They'd been in the field 6 days. 1 more day was the plan, but plans change. September 27th, 0600 hours, they were compromised. Morrison never found out how. Maybe a broken twig, maybe Chen coughed, maybe the enemy had dogs, maybe they'd established a pattern the VC had spotted. It didn't matter. Walsh saw them first, estimated 15 to 20 VC, moving in a sweep line through the jungle searching. The patrol had maybe 5 minutes before the enemy would be on top of them. Morrison made the call. Break contact. Move to the pre-designated emergency extraction point. Call for immediate pickup. They moved fast, abandoning stealth for speed. The emergency extraction point was 600 meters northeast, a small clearing they'd identified during patrol planning. 600 meters, maybe 8 minutes of hard running through jungle, and they had to do it while staying together and staying ahead of the enemy. Davies, as tail end, laid 2 M18 Claymore mines along their back trail, quick and dirty, just to slow pursuit. Then they ran. The enemy found their position faster than Morrison expected. He heard the first shots at 8 hours. AK-47 fire, full automatic, enemy spraying the area they'd just vacated. Then voices, Vietnamese, coordinating. More shots. The claymores detonated, a double crack that echoed through the jungle. Someone screamed. The shooting intensified. Fisher got on the radio. "0! This is 3-2. We are compromised. Taking fire. Request immediate extraction. Over." Base responded within seconds. 3-2. 0. Extraction team scrambling. What is your POs? Fisher read off coordinates. 0 copies. Extraction inbound. ETA 8 minutes. Mark your ayaya. Pause with smoke when you reach the LZ. Over. 8 minutes. Morrison checked his watch. They had to reach the clearing, establish a perimeter, hold off the enemy, and survive for 8 minutes. Behind them, the shooting got louder. The VC weren't just pursuing, they were converging, trying to cut off escape routes. Morrison could hear multiple groups now, communicating with each other, coordinating their attack. The patrol had maybe 40 meters lead, and it was shrinking. They reached the clearing at Otseavafim. It wasn't much of a clearing, maybe 30 meters across. Elephant grass chest high, surrounded by dense jungle. But it was flat enough for a helicopter to land. Morrison deployed the patrol in a rough circle, everyone facing outward, maximum fields of fire. "Fisher, pop smoke when you hear the choppers. Walsh, watch our 6. Chen, Davies, cover left and right flanks. If they come, we make noise. Full auto, grenades, everything. Make them think we're a platoon, not 5 guys." At 0617, the first Viet Cong appeared at the tree line, 40 meters south. Walsh opened fire with his L-101, 3-round bursts, precise. The VC went down. More enemy at the tree line, spreading out, taking cover. Morrison threw a grenade, watched it arc through the air, detonate in a shower of dirt and shrapnel. The enemy pulled back slightly, but they weren't retreating. They were positioning, getting ready to assault. At R06-9, Morrison heard it, the distinctive whump-whump-whump of Iroquois rotor blades, 2 helicopters coming in from the southeast. "Fisher, smoke now!" Fisher pulled the pin on a red smoke grenade, tossed it into the center of the clearing. Red smoke billowed up, marking their position. Morrison keyed his radio. "Extraction 1. This is 3-2. We are in the LZ. Red smoke. Heavy contact. Estimate 30 to 40 enemies surrounding our position. Over." The response came immediately. Australian accent, calm, professional. 3-2. Extraction 1. We see your smoke. 2 minutes out. Hold tight. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The Viet Cong opened up with everything they had. AK-47s, RPD machine guns, mortar rounds starting to fall, nowhere close to accurate, but close enough to be terrifying. The patrol returned fire, short controlled bursts, conserving ammunition. Morrison counted his magazines, 2 left, maybe 40 rounds. Walsh was down to 1 magazine. Davies called out, "Taking fire from the east, multiple targets." Morrison looked. 10, maybe 15 VC, moving through the trees, trying to flank them. He fired, saw 2 go down, but there were more coming. At 0621, the helicopters arrived. 2 UH-1H Iroquois from 9 Squadron RAF, gunship configuration, miniguns and rocket pods, door gunners with M60 machine guns. The lead helicopter, call sign Bushranger 01, came in low and fast, flying 15 feet above the tree canopy. The pilot was Flight Lieutenant Brian Crawford, on his second tour in Vietnam, 260 combat missions under his belt. His co-pilot was Warrant Officer Tom Henderson Rahn, one of 8 Royal Australian Navy pilots attached to 9 Squadron to help with the pilot shortage. The second helicopter, Bushranger 02, was piloted by Flying Officer Mike Donovan with Warrant Officer Peter Jackson as co-pilot. Crawford saw the situation immediately. Red smoke in the clearing, muzzle flashes all around the perimeter, enemy in the tree line, heavy fire. The SAS patrol was surrounded, outnumbered, minutes away from being overrun. Standard extraction procedure was to land, load the patrol, take off. Standard procedure assumed a reasonably secure LZ. This LZ was anything but secure. Crawford made a split-second decision. He'd land, but 02 would stay overhead, providing suppressing fire. 02, hold high cover, light up that tree line. We're going in. 02's miniguns opened up, 4,000 rounds per minute, tracers ripping through the jungle. The noise was apocalyptic. Crawford brought 01 down hard, flaring at the last second, landing gear touching down in the elephant grass. The door gunners, Corporal Steve Miller and leading aircraft man Jamie Price, opened fire with their M60s covering the flanks. Morrison didn't wait for invitation. Move! 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 The patrol ran for the helicopter. Davies reached it first, threw himself aboard. Chen next. Walsh third. Fisher hesitated, looking back. Morrison saw why. There was movement in the grass, something wrong. Then Fisher yelled, "Man down!" Morrison looked. Davies was slumped against the helicopter's bulkhead, blood spreading across his chest. Chen was already on him, tearing open his medical pack. Morrison grabbed Fisher, shoved him toward the helicopter. "Get on!" Fisher climbed aboard, took one of the door gunner's M60s, started firing. Walsh did the same on the opposite side. Morrison was the last man, running full sprint for the helicopter, rounds snapping past his head. He dove through the door, landed hard on the metal floor. Crawford didn't wait for confirmation. He pulled maximum power, the Iroquois straining, lifting, 30 feet, 60 feet, 100 feet. The jungle dropped away below them, but they weren't clear yet. Ground fire followed them up, rounds punching through the thin aluminum skin. Crawford felt the helicopter shudder, heard the impact of bullets on metal. Henderson called out damage reports. Took hits in the tail, hydraulics showing yellow. We're good for now. 02 pulled in close, still firing, covering their ascent. At Aero 624 they were clear, climbing to 500 feet, turning southeast toward Nui Dat. Morrison looked at Davies. Chen had his shirt off, pressure dressing against a sucking chest wound. Davies was conscious, barely, eyes wide, trying to breathe. Chen looked at Morrison, shook his head slightly. Not good. Morrison keyed the helicopter's intercom. We need a dust-off. We've got one critical. Crawford was already ahead of him. Nui Dat. Base, this is Bushranger 01. Inbound with 5 extracted personnel. 1 casualty critical. Chest wound. Request immediate medical standing by. ETA 12 minutes. Nui Dat responded. 01. Medical standing by. Direct approach approved. You are cleared straight in. The flight back was the longest 12 minutes of Morrison's life. Chen worked on Davies the whole way, trying to keep him alive, talking to him, telling him to stay awake. Stay with us? You're going home, mate. Just stay awake. Fisher sat with his back against the bulkhead, still holding the M60, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Walsh stared out the door at the jungle passing below. Morrison held Davies's hand, squeezed it, felt a weak squeeze back. They landed at Nui Dat at 6:36. Medical personnel were waiting, stretcher ready. They loaded Davies in seconds, running for the aid station. Morrison, Fisher, Walsh, and Chen climbed out of the helicopter more slowly, legs unsteady, ears ringing from the gunfire and rotor noise. Crawford shut down the engines, climbed out, walked around the helicopter assessing damage. 23 bullet holes. Tail rotor had taken hits. Hydraulic lines were leaking. The helicopter would fly again, but not today. Crawford found Morrison standing by the rotor mast. "Your mate going to make it?" Morrison didn't know. "Chen's good. If anyone can keep him alive until they get him to surgery, it's Chen." Crawford nodded. He'd seen enough combat to know the odds. Chest wounds in the field. Even with immediate extraction, the survival rate wasn't good. "You lot did well out there. Holding that position, that was solid work." Morrison looked at him. "You came in under fire. That's not standard procedure." Crawford shrugged. "Neither is leavin' blokes on the ground. We do what needs doing." That was the ethos of 9 Squadron, and before that, the EMU flight with the 135th Assault Helicopter Company. No man left behind, no matter the risk, no matter what the manual said. Between June 1966 and November 1971, 9 Squadron RAIF flew 237 forth 124 missions in support of Australian forces in Vietnam. They inserted and extracted over 700 SAS patrols. They evacuated thousands of wounded. They took fire on hundreds of missions. 7 Iroquois were lost to enemy action or accidents. 2 crewmen were killed in action, but they never left anyone behind. Not once. The statistics don't tell the full story. Each mission was a calculation, risk versus necessity, pilots making split-second decisions that meant life or death for men on the ground. The relationship between the SAS and 9 Squadron was built on mutual trust and mutual respect. The SAS trusted the pilots to come in, no matter how hot the LZ. The pilots trusted the SAS to hold their position until extraction was possible. That trust was earned through shared experience, through missions where everything went wrong and men still came home. Private David Fisher didn't come home that day, not the way he should have. He fell from the helicopter during the extraction, about 30 meters above the jungle canopy. The official investigation suggested he'd attached his carabiner to the wrong loop on the extraction rope, or that the carabiner failed under stress. Morrison always believed Fisher had been hit during the extraction, wounded but didn't say anything, lost consciousness during the flight, and fell. They searched for 6 days. Ground patrols, air reconnaissance, everything. The jungle kept its secrets. Fisher was declared missing in action, presumed dead. His body wasn't recovered until August 2008, 39 years later. During a joint Australian-Vietnamese search operation, he was repatriated to Australia and buried with full military honors. Private John Davies died during surgery at the 36th Evacuation Hospital at Vung Tau on September 27, 1969, at 17:45 hours. He was 20 years old, from Fremantle, Western Australia. His parents received the telegram on October 1st. The mission that killed Davies and Fisher, that injured no one else but could have killed everyone, was classified as a successful patrol extraction. The intelligence they gathered on enemy positions and movements in the Nui May Tao area contributed to planning for future operations. The Viet Cong staging area was hit 3 days later by Australian artillery and RAF bombers. Estimated 40 enemy killed. The cold equations of war. 2 Australian lives for intelligence that saved others later. Morrison understood the math. Understanding it didn't make it easier. After the extraction, Morrison was given 3 days' rest, then went back on patrol. SAS squadrons operated on rotation schedules that were relentless. 7 days in the field, 2 to 3 days back at base, then out again. The mental toll was immense. You learned to compartmentalize, to put the deaths in a box in your mind, and not open it while you were still in country. Morrison put Fisher and Davies in that box and kept working. He led 9 more patrols before his tour ended in December 1969. Every extraction, he watched the men climb aboard the helicopters, counted them, made sure everyone who got on stayed on until they landed. He developed a routine, almost superstitious. Last man on, first man off, always. Keep the patrol together. Don't let anyone fall behind, fall through the cracks, fall from the sky. Flight Lieutenant Brian Crawford flew until July 1970, completed his second tour, returned to Australia, and continued serving in the RAF. He never talked much about the extractions, about the times he landed helicopters in places no pilot should land, under fire that should have brought him down. When asked, he'd say he was just doing his job. The men on the ground were doing the hard work. All he did was drive the bus. Warrant Officer Tom Henderson, the RAN co-pilot, returned to naval service after his attachment to 9 Squadron ended. He flew helicopters off Australian destroyers, taught at the Naval Aviation School, retired as a commander in 1985. In a 1992 interview for a military history project, he was asked about the September 27th extraction. He said it was one of dozens of hot extractions he flew, nothing particularly special about it, except that they got everyone out who was still alive to get out. That was the measure of success. Not whether you took fire, not whether the helicopter got damaged, but whether you brought the men home. The doctrine of helicopter combat extraction evolved through trial, error, and accumulated experience across the Vietnam War. Early in the war, helicopter crews followed strict safety protocols. Land only in secure LZs, abort if taking fire. Don't risk aircraft and crew for small unit extractions. Those protocols changed because reality demanded it. Small reconnaissance patrols, SAS teams, MIC VSOG units, LRRP teams, they operated beyond the wire, beyond immediate support, in enemy territory, where being compromised meant certain death without rapid extraction. Commanders learned that leaving men in the field because the LZ was too hot meant losing those men. Pilots learned that calculated risks, aggressive flying, suppressive fire from gunships, and speed could overcome defenses that looked impossible on paper. The SAS and 9 Squadron relationship was built on this mutual understanding. The pilots would come no matter what. The SAS would hold, no matter how outnumbered. Together they made the impossible routine. Between 1966 and 1971, Australian SAS squadrons conducted nearly 1,200 patrols in Vietnam. They killed an estimated 500 enemy soldiers, captured 11 prisoners, and provided intelligence that shaped tactical and operational planning across Viet Cong Province and beyond. Their own casualties, considering the nature of their operations, were remarkably light. 1 killed in action, 1 died of wounds, 3 accidentally killed, 1 missing in action, 1 death from illness, and 28 wounded. The missing in action was Fisher. Those statistics represent roughly 580 men who served in the CSR in Vietnam over those 5 years. Each patrol was typically 5 to 6 men, operating for 5 to 7 days in territory controlled by the enemy, often miles from friendly forces. The extraction rate, the percentage of patrols successfully brought out, was over 98%. That number exists because of pilots like Crawford and Henderson, door gunners like Miller and Price, and the ground crews who kept the helicopters flying despite battle damage, harsh conditions, and maintenance challenges that would have grounded civilian aircraft. The story of September 27, 1969, is one story among hundreds. Each extraction was different. Each presented unique challenges. Each required decisions that balanced risk against necessity. Some extractions went smoothly, helicopters landing in cold LZs, loading patrols that had completed their missions without contact. Others were nightmares. Fire coming from 3 sides, men wounded, ammunition running low, enemy closing in, helicopters shot up but still flying. The common thread was the willingness of pilots to fly into situations that terrified them, because men on the ground were counting on them. That willingness, that commitment, saved lives. The exact number is impossible to calculate. How many patrols would have been lost if extraction wasn't available? How many men would have died, been captured, disappeared into the jungle? Conservative estimates suggest that rapid helicopter extraction saved between 200 and 300 Australian lives during the Vietnam War. Factor in American, South Vietnamese, and other Allied forces using similar tactics, and the number runs into the thousands. The tactical evolution spread. American units adopted Australian SAS patrol techniques, including aggressive contact drills, immediate suppressive fire when compromised, and coordination with helicopter gunships for extraction. The May CV Recondo School at Nha Trang incorporated Australian methods into their curriculum. Australian SAS personnel taught there in 1966 and 1967. The lessons learned in the jungles of Viet Cong Province, paid for in blood and courage, became doctrine that extended far beyond Australia's small contribution to the war. Modern special operations units still teach variations of these techniques: patrol insertion and extraction, helicopter operations in hostile environments, coordination between ground teams and aviation assets. The doctrinal foundations were laid in Vietnam by men who figured it out through necessity and survival. The Australian SAS's record in Vietnam, particularly their success rate on patrols, remains one of the most impressive in special operations history. Part of that success was training, selection, and leadership. Part was the terrain and enemy tactics, but a significant part was the relationship with 9 Squadron, the confidence that if things went wrong, if the patrol was compromised, extraction would come. Sergeant Ray Morrison survived Vietnam. He returned to Australia in December 1969, was promoted to warrant officer in 1971, and served as an instructor at the SAS Training Squadron until 1975. He never forgot the men who didn't come back. On September 27th every year, he'd take a day off, drive to a quiet spot in the Dandenongs, and spend the afternoon alone, thinking about Davies and Fisher, about the mission that should have been routine, about the jungle and the helicopters and the sound of bullets cutting through elephant grass. He married in 1972 a woman named Sarah from Adelaide, had 3 children, retired from the Army in 1985 as a regimental sergeant major. He worked security at a Melbourne hospital for 15 years, lived quietly, rarely talked about Vietnam. When asked, he'd say he did his job and came home. That was all. In 1998, Morrison attended a 9 Squadron reunion in Perth. Brian Crawford was there, older, grayer, but still carrying himself with the quiet confidence Morrison remembered. They talked for 3 hours, first time they'd seen each other in nearly 30 years. Crawford asked about the patrol, about what happened after. Morrison told him about Davies, about Fisher, about the search. Crawford told him about the helicopter, about the 23 bullet holes, about landing at Nui Dat and realizing how close they'd come to not making it. They talked about the other missions, the ones that worked out better, the ones where everyone came home. Before Morrison left, Crawford said something he'd been carrying for 30 years. "I think about that extraction sometimes. Wonder if we could have done something different, gotten in faster, gotten your mate out before he fell." Morrison shook his head. "You came when we needed you. That's what mattered. Fisher's fall, that wasn't on you. That was combat. Things happen." Crawford nodded, but Morrison could see he still carried it. They all did, the survivors, the weight of the ones who didn't make it. David Fisher's remains were found in August 2008 by a joint Australian-Vietnamese recovery team searching the area near Nui May Tao. Identification was confirmed through dental records and DNA analysis. He was repatriated to Australia in December 2008 and buried at Karrakatta Cemetery in Perth on January 17, 2009. Morrison attended the funeral. He was 70 years old, walked with a cane from a hip injury, but he stood at attention during the service, saluted when the honor guard fired their rifles, and cried when they played the last post. Fisher was home finally, 39 years late, but home. After the funeral, Morrison drove to Swanbourne, to Campbell Barracks, where the SAS is based, to the memorial called The Rock. It's a large piece of granite with bronze plaques listing the names of SASR members killed in operations or training. Fisher's name is there, added in 2009, when his death was officially confirmed rather than presumed. Morrison stood in front of the rock for a long time, reading names, remembering faces, feeling the weight of survival. The story of September 27, 1969, is not unique. It's one among thousands of stories from Vietnam, moments where ordinary men did extraordinary things because the situation demanded it. The mission didn't fail because pilots flew into a hot LZ they should have avoided. The mission succeeded, partially, because those pilots calculated that the risk of going in was less than the certainty of leaving men to die. That calculation, that willingness to risk everything for men on the ground, defined the relationship between helicopter crews and ground forces throughout the war. It's why helicopter pilots have some of the highest casualty rates of any specialty in Vietnam. It's why the Huey became the iconic symbol of the war, not just as a machine, but as a representation of the men who flew them into hell to bring other men out. The legacy lives in doctrine, in training, in the way modern militaries approach combat extraction. It lives in the bond between aviators and ground forces, the understanding that when things go wrong, the helicopters will come. It lives in the memories of men like Morrison, Crawford, Henderson, men who were there, who know what it meant to rely on someone else for survival, or to be the one others relied on. Ray Morrison died in 2014 at age 74, heart attack in his sleep. His obituary in the Melbourne Age mentioned his service in Vietnam with the SAS, his career in the Army, his work after retirement, his family. It didn't mention September 27, 1969. It didn't mention Davies or Fisher or the jungle or the helicopters. Some stories don't make it into obituaries. They live in the memories of those who were there, in the quiet conversations at reunions, in the letters veterans write to each other, in the moments standing in front of the rock, reading names carved in bronze. Brian Crawford retired from the RAF in 1990 as a wing commander. He flew helicopters for 28 years, accumulated over 5,000 flight hours, trained dozens of pilots, and earned a Distinguished Flying Cross for his service in Vietnam. He passed away in 2019 at age 76. His funeral was attended by over 200 people, including 40 former helicopter pilots from 9 Squadron. Morrison sent a letter, read aloud during the service, describing Crawford as the man who came when called, no matter the risk, no matter the odds, the man who brought him and his patrol home. Tom Henderson retired from the Royal Australian Navy in 1985, served in maritime patrol aviation, taught at the Naval Academy, and consulted on helicopter operations for civilian search and rescue. He died in 2022 at age 78. His family donated his logbooks and service records to the Australian War Memorial, documenting missions flown, hours in combat, extractions completed. The numbers tell part of the story. The full story is in what those numbers represent: the lives saved, the men brought home, the missions flown when every instinct said to turn back. The helicopters are history now. The UH-1H Iroquois served with 9 Squadron until 1989, when battlefield helicopter operations transferred from the RAF to the Australian Army. One of the Iroquois that flew in Vietnam, serial number A2-310, is on display at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. Morrison saw it there in 2010 during a visit with his grandson. He stood looking at the helicopter for 20 minutes, pointing out details, the minigun mounts, the door gunner positions, the way the crew chief would lean out during landing to guide the pilot. His grandson asked if that was the helicopter that rescued him. Morrison said no, but it was the same type, flown by the same men, into the same kind of situations. He told his grandson about the noise, the rotor wash flattening the grass, the smell of aviation fuel and gun smoke, the way the helicopter felt. When you climbed aboard, solid and real and safe, the transition from being hunted to being rescued. He told him about Crawford and Henderson, about Miller and Price, about the men who flew the helicopters. He told him about Davies and Fisher, about the cost. The broader context matters. The Vietnam War involved over 60,000 Australian personnel between 1962 and 1973. Of those, 521 died as a result of the war. Another 3,000 were wounded. The Australian commitment was small compared to American forces, but for Australia, a nation of 12 million people in 1969, the impact was significant. The SAS component was tiny, never more than 1 squadron in country at a time, roughly 120 men. But their contribution to intelligence gathering, their success rate on patrols, their reputation among both Allied forces and the enemy, was disproportionate to their numbers. The Viet Cong called them Ma Rung, phantoms of the jungle, recognition of their effectiveness. That effectiveness existed because of training, selection, experience, and support. The helicopter support from 9 Squadron was not incidental. It was fundamental. Patrols operated aggressively because they knew extraction was available. Commanders tasked patrols with high-risk missions because the extraction capability reduced risk to acceptable levels. Pilots flew into hostile territory because the alternative, leaving men behind, was unacceptable. The tactical relationship between SAS patrols and 9 Squadron evolved through 1966 to 1971, from tentative cooperation to seamless integration. Early patrols experienced delays in extraction, miscommunication, insertions in wrong locations. By 1968, the procedures were refined. Patrols carried color-coded smoke grenades, specific radio frequencies, pre-designated extraction points with coordinates memorized. Pilots knew patrol areas, could navigate by terrain features, understood the tactics patrols used when compromised. Door gunners trained with SAS troops, learned their signals, their contact drills. The integration extended to maintenance crews, intelligence officers, operations planners, everyone understanding that the mission didn't end when the patrol inserted. It ended when they extracted safely. The innovation wasn't in technology. The UH-1H Iroquois was standard equipment, not particularly advanced compared to later helicopters. The innovation was in tactics, in aggressive application of available assets, in willingness to accept risk. Crawford's decision to land in a hot LZ wasn't reckless. It was calculated. He had gunship support from 02. He had experienced door gunners. He knew the patrol's position, the enemy's position, the time available. He assessed that landing quickly. Loading the patrol and getting out would work despite the fire. He was right. If he'd been wrong, if the helicopter had been hit during landing or takeoff, if the tail rotor had failed or the engine had been struck, the result would have been a crashed helicopter, 5 SAS troopers, and 4 aircrew, all dead or captured. The risk was real. The decision to take that risk required judgment developed through hundreds of previous missions, muscle memory, and confidence in his aircraft and crew. Modern military aviation still teaches these principles: risk assessment in hostile environments, rapid decision-making under fire, crew coordination during combat operations. The foundations are unchanged. The technology is better. Communications are more reliable. Helicopters are more capable. But the core challenge remains: how do you extract personnel from hostile territory when the enemy knows you're coming and is trying to kill you? The answer developed in Vietnam, refined by units like 9 Squadron and the American dust-off crews, is speed, suppressive fire, coordination, and courage. You come in fast, you shoot anything that moves, you land, you load, you leave. You do it because men are counting on you. You accept the risk because leaving them is not an option. The human cost extended beyond those who died. Post-traumatic stress, divorce rates among Vietnam veterans, substance abuse, suicide, the invisible casualties that emerged in the years and decades after the war. Morrison dealt with it. Nightmares, anger, difficulty adjusting to civilian life. He found help through the RSL, through counseling, through talking with other veterans. Crawford had nightmares too. Dreams of landing in clearings surrounded by enemy. Dreams where the helicopter wouldn't climb, where bullets came through the cockpit, where he couldn't save the men on the ground. He learned to manage it, never completely overcame it. Henderson was more fortunate, or perhaps just better at hiding it. He seemed to transition smoothly, but his family later revealed he'd struggled quietly for years. The cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield, far beyond the official casualty lists. It lives in the survivors, in the weight they carry, in the memories that won't fade. The story of September 27, 1969, matters not because it was extraordinary, but because it was representative. It represents hundreds of similar missions, thousands of men who served, decades of tactical evolution, and the enduring principle that in combat, you don't leave your people behind. That principle transcends nationality, service branch, time period. It's fundamental to military culture, to the bond that allows soldiers to function in circumstances where fear should paralyze them, knowing that if you fall, someone will come for you, knowing that if you're wounded, you'll be evacuated, knowing that if you're surrounded, extraction will come. That knowledge allows men to take risks, to complete missions, to function in combat. Crawford and Henderson provided that knowledge by their actions. They came when called, they flew into fire, they brought the patrol home. 2 men died, but 3 survived because 2 pilots made the decision to land in a clearing. They should have avoided. The mathematics of war are brutal. 2 dead versus 5 dead is a success. 3 wounded versus 5 dead is a success. Mission completed with casualties versus mission failed with total loss is a success. Those calculations don't account for grief, for loss, for the families receiving telegrams. They don't account for Morrison's guilt at surviving when Davies and Fisher didn't. They don't account for Crawford's nightmares about the extraction. They don't account for the human cost of decisions made in seconds with lives in the balance. But the calculations are necessary because the alternative is paralysis, the inability to act, the decision to do nothing, because every option involves risk. Morrison understood this. Crawford understood this. Every combat veteran understands this. You do what needs doing, accept the consequences, and live with the weight. The legacy of 9 Squadron, of the SAS in Vietnam, of the men who flew and fought in that war, lives in institutional memory. The Australian Defence Force studies those operations, teaches those tactics, honors those veterans. The lessons learned in Vietnam influenced Australian military operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflicts. The doctrine of aggressive helicopter operations, of special forces working closely with aviation assets, of accepting calculated risks to achieve mission success, all trace back to Vietnam, to missions like September 27, 1969. The men who developed those tactics didn't sit in offices writing doctrine. They learned by doing, by surviving, by watching friends die, and figuring out how to prevent the next death. That knowledge, purchased with blood, became the foundation for modern Australian special operations. The mechanics of combat extraction reveal themselves in the details. Crawford's approach to the LZ on September 27th wasn't random. He'd done it dozens of times before, each mission teaching him something new. The standard approach was from altitude, diving to treetop level at the last possible moment to minimize exposure time. But diving meant vulnerability during the descent, 2 to 3 seconds where the helicopter was a predictable target. Crawford had developed a different technique, learned from American pilots in the 135th Assault Helicopter Company. Come in low and fast from the start, hugging the terrain, using the jungle itself as concealment until the last few hundred meters. Then pop up, flare hard, land fast. The technique reduced exposure time, but increased the risk of collision with trees, power lines, or terrain. It required precision flying and absolute trust in your aircraft's capabilities. Henderson, in the co-pilot seat, managed the radios during the approach. 4 different frequencies, each carrying critical information. 1 for communication with the patrol on the ground. 1 for coordination with 02 overhead. 1 for monitoring other air traffic in the area. 1 for the Tactical Operations Center at Nui May Tao, switching between frequencies, processing information, feeding Crawford updates on enemy positions, all while watching for ground fire and preparing for possible engine failure. The workload was intense. Helicopter combat operations weren't about flying skill alone. They were about information management, decision-making under stress, crew coordination, and the ability to function while terrified. Henderson was terrified on September 27th. He'd later admit that, in interviews, every mission that involved landing under fire terrified him. But terror doesn't prevent action. It sharpens focus, heightens awareness, makes you very good at not dying. The door gunners, Miller and Price, had their own calculus. Their job was to suppress enemy fire during approach and extraction, to make the VC keep their heads down long enough for the helicopter to land and load. The M60 machine gun fires between 500 and 650 rounds per minute, depending on how fast the gunner pulls the trigger. Each gun carried 1,200 rounds in belted ammunition. That's roughly 2 minutes of continuous fire, but nobody fires continuously. Short bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, aimed at muzzle flashes or movement in the tree line. The goal isn't to kill specific enemies, though that happens. The goal is suppression, making the enemy stop shooting long enough for the extraction to work. Miller saw muzzle flashes at the southwest corner of the clearing during the approach. He engaged immediately, walking his tracers through the tree line. Saw movement, corrected, fired again. No way to know if he hit anyone. No time to verify. Just fire, suppress, keep firing. Price covered the opposite side, engaging targets to the east and northeast. The noise inside the helicopter was overwhelming. Twin turboshaft engines at full power, rotor blades chopping the air, 2 M60s hammering away, incoming rounds cracking past or punching through the fuselage. Normal conversation was impossible. Everything happened through hand signals, intercom clicks, and training so ingrained it became reflex. The patrol's movement to the helicopter demonstrated training and discipline under the worst possible circumstances. They didn't panic, didn't bunch up, didn't break. Morrison directed them with hand signals and shouted commands that barely carried over the noise. Davies first, because he was closest. Chen next, because he was the medic, needed aboard to treat Davies. Walsh third, because he was the best shot, could provide covering fire from the helicopter. Fisher fourth, Morrison last as patrol commander, because the last man out needs to ensure everyone else made it. That order wasn't arbitrary. It was doctrine, practiced until it became automatic. During training, SAS patrols rehearsed extractions dozens of times, learning exactly how to move, where to position themselves, how to board quickly without blocking each other. The training saved lives on September 27th. Under fire, exhausted, terrified, the patrol executed the extraction as trained, almost perfectly. Fisher's death proves that almost isn't enough in combat. The investigation into Fisher's fall examined every possible cause. The extraction rope and carabiner were standard issue, properly maintained, within service life specifications. Fisher's equipment was inspected when his body was recovered in 2008. The carabiner showed damage consistent with impact, but that could have occurred during the fall or in the years afterward. The official finding was accidental death during combat operations, cause uncertain. Morrison always believed Fisher was wounded during the firefight in the clearing. Didn't report it, because admitting injury meant delaying extraction, lost consciousness, or weakened during the helicopter's climb, and fell. There's no way to prove that theory. Fisher can't tell anyone what happened. The helicopter crew didn't see him fall until it was too late. Chen was focused on Davies. Walsh and the door gunners were firing outward. The fall happened in seconds, 30 meters above dense jungle, and Fisher disappeared into the green canopy. The search teams found the area where he fell based on Crawford's coordinates, but the jungle was too dense for effective searching. Ground teams spent 6 days walking grid patterns, cutting through undergrowth, finding nothing. Fisher's body ended up 200 meters from where they searched most intensively, moved by scavengers or simply missed in the thick vegetation. 39 years he lay there, bones scattered by animals, gear deteriorating, slowly becoming part of the jungle. The psychological impact on Crawford was profound. He blamed himself for Fisher's death. If he'd climbed slower, if he'd delayed takeoff to verify everyone was secured, if he'd done something different, Fisher might have survived. That's the burden pilots carry. Every decision has consequences. Sometimes those consequences are deaths that might have been prevented. Morrison tried to absolve Crawford of responsibility during their 1998 conversation, told him there was nothing he could have done differently, that Fisher's fall wasn't predictable or preventable, that flying slower would have just exposed the helicopter longer to ground fire, potentially killing everyone. Crawford understood the logic. Understanding doesn't eliminate guilt. The mind knows it wasn't your fault. The heart insists you should have saved him. Both are true simultaneously. Living with that contradiction is part of surviving combat. The broader pattern of helicopter losses in Vietnam provides context. Between 1961 and 1975, approximately 12,000 helicopters served in Vietnam across all American, Australian, and Allied forces. Of those, 5,086 were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. That's a loss rate of over 40%. The causes varied. Ground fire accounted for roughly 60% of losses. Mechanical failure, pilot error, bad weather, and combat damage each contributed to the remainder. The survival rate for crews varied by mission type. Medevac crews, who flew into active combat zones regularly, had casualty rates approaching 30%. General transport crews flying between secure bases had casualty rates around 5%. Combat extraction crews, like those flying SAS insertions and extractions, fell somewhere in between, depending on how hot the missions ran. 9 squadrons' loss rate was lower than average. 7 helicopters lost over 5 years, 2 crewmen killed, dozens injured. The lower casualty rate reflected multiple factors: well-maintained aircraft, experienced crews, tactical innovation, smaller operational area focused around Viet Cong Province, and perhaps luck. War always involves luck. Crawford's Iroquois took 23 hits on September 27th. Any one of those rounds could have struck something critical. The hydraulics, the fuel tanks, the engine, the transmission, the pilots themselves. One round through the wrong component, and the helicopter crashes. Crawford, Henderson, Miller, Price, Morrison, Fisher, Walsh, Chen, and Davies, all dead. The round misses by inches, or strikes something non-critical, and most survive. Inches and luck. The tactical evolution of hot extractions continued after Vietnam. American forces used similar techniques in Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The fundamental challenges remained constant. How to extract personnel from hostile territory when the enemy knows you're coming. The answers evolved with technology. Better helicopters with more armor, faster speed, greater range. Better weapon systems, more accurate, more lethal. Better communications, satellite-based, harder to jam. Better intelligence, Predator drones providing overwatch, identifying enemy positions before the extraction begins. But the core requirement hasn't changed. Someone has to fly into hostile territory, land or hover, load personnel, and fly out. That someone has to be willing to accept risk. Technology reduces risk, but can't eliminate it. The Taliban in Afghanistan learned to hit helicopters during landing and takeoff, same as the Viet Cong learned in Vietnam. The tactics change, the weapons improve, but the fundamental vulnerability of a helicopter in a hot LZ remains. The relationship between Special Operations Forces and aviation remains as critical now as it was in 1969. Modern SAS, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, British SAS all rely on helicopter insertion and extraction. The insertion is relatively simple, done at night, in areas the enemy isn't watching. The extraction is where things get complicated. If the mission goes well, extraction is routine. If the mission goes bad, if the team is compromised, if there are casualties, extraction becomes a race between the helicopters and the enemy response. Time compression, chaos, violence, and the absolute requirement that the helicopters come when called. That requirement is the foundation of special operations. Teams accept enormous risk because they know extraction is available. Take away that confidence, and special operations become impossible. You can't ask men to operate in enemy territory, outnumbered hundreds to one, without guarantee of extraction. The guarantee isn't written. It's proven through actions like September 27, 1969. Crawford and Henderson proved it. Every helicopter pilot who flies into hostile territory to extract ground forces proves it again. The guarantee is maintained through blood, courage, and the accumulated weight of men who died keeping the promise. Morrison's post-war life illustrated the difficulty of transition. He went from patrol commander, making life and death decisions, leading men in combat, to instructor at the SAS training squadron. The instructing was important work, passing knowledge to the next generation, but it lacked the intensity of combat operations. He missed it. Not the killing, not the danger, but the clarity. In combat, everything is simplified. Survive, complete the mission, bring your men home. 3 objectives, clear and absolute. In peacetime, life becomes complicated again. Mortgages, relationships, career progression, the mundane challenges that seem trivial compared to survival in the jungle. Many veterans struggle with this transition. The peace feels hollow after the war. Morrison struggled for years. Drank too much in the early 1970s, got angry over small things. Sarah, his wife, stayed with him through the worst of it. She'd known what she was marrying. Her father had served in Korea, came back, changed. She recognized the patterns, got Morrison into counseling through the RSL, and supported him while he worked through it. By the late 1970s, he'd found balance. Still carried the weight, still thought about Fisher and Davies, but learned to function despite it. The Australian government's handling of Vietnam veterans was mixed. Initially, there was ambivalence. The war was unpopular by the late 1960s. Soldiers returning home weren't celebrated. They were ignored, sometimes vilified. The national service protests, the anti-war movement, the political controversy, it all complicated the veterans' experience. Recognition came later, in the 1980s and 1990s, as public opinion shifted, and the country acknowledged what its soldiers had endured. The Vietnam Veterans Welcome Home Parade in Sydney in October 1987 drew over 30,000 marchers and hundreds of thousands of spectators. Morrison attended, wore his medals, walked with other SAS veterans. The recognition helped. Not as much as earlier acknowledgement would have, but it helped. The government established support services, expanded veterans' benefits, funded research into PTSD and Agent Orange exposure. The support came late, but eventually came. Crawford's experience differed slightly from Morrison's. He remained in the military, which provided structure and purpose. The RAIF understood what its Vietnam veterans had experienced. Crawford moved, through various postings, teaching new pilots, commanding squadrons, advancing in rank. He found satisfaction in the work, in passing on knowledge, in developing the next generation of helicopter pilots. But he carried the weight, too. The missions where everything went wrong, the crews that didn't come back, the close calls where luck was the only thing that saved them. He dreamed about Fisher sometimes, about the moment when he realized someone had fallen, the sick feeling of knowing a man was gone, and there was nothing he could do about it. He dreamed about other missions, too, the ones where the helicopter took heavy fire, where systems failed, where he barely made it back. The dreams never stopped. He learned to manage them, to function despite them, but they were always there, waiting in the quiet moments. The technological legacy of Vietnam helicopter operations influenced military aviation for decades. The lessons learned about maintenance in harsh environments, about crew coordination under fire, about tactical approaches to hot LZs, all became doctrine. The UH-1 Iroquois itself became the standard against which other helicopters were measured. Reliable, versatile, relatively simple to maintain, capable of operating in conditions that would ground more sophisticated aircraft. The Huey's service life extended far beyond Vietnam. Australia operated them until 1989. The United States used them through the 1980s. Some countries still operate variants of the Huey today, over 60 years after the first prototype flew. That longevity speaks to the design's effectiveness. It also speaks to the fact that the fundamental requirements of military helicopters haven't changed dramatically. Carry troops, fly in bad weather, take damage, and keep flying. Be maintainable in field conditions. The Huey did all of that well. Later helicopters do it better, but the requirements remain the same. The story of September 27, 1969, ends where it began, in the jungle, in the noise and confusion of combat, in the moment when everything hangs in the balance, and decisions made in seconds determine who lives and who dies. Red smoke in a clearing, helicopters inbound, enemy closing in. Crawford landing his Iroquois in a place no sane pilot would land. Morrison getting his patrol aboard, one man already dying, another about to fall. The helicopter lifting, fighting for altitude, bullets punching through aluminum. 8 minutes of combat that would define lives, end lives, save lives. 8 minutes that became legend among men who understood what it meant. 8 minutes that represented everything about the war, the courage and the cost, the heroism and the tragedy, the bonds forged in fire, and the weight carried afterward. The helicopters came when called. The patrols held when surrounded. Men died. Men survived. Men came home. That's the story. That's what matters. That's what we remember. Not the politics, not the strategy, not the grand historical narratives, but the individual moments when courage made the difference. When pilots flew into fire because men on the ground needed them. When soldiers held positions they couldn't hold because giving up meant death. When medics worked on dying friends while bullets cracked overhead. When ordinary men did extraordinary things because the situation demanded it and they refused to fail. Those moments define wars more than battles or campaigns. They define the men who fight them. Crawford and Henderson, Morrison and Walsh, Chen and Davies and Fisher, door gunners and crew chiefs and ground crews, and everyone who kept the helicopters flying and the patrols operating. They all contributed. They all mattered. Some died. Some survived. All carried the weight. The story of September 27, 1969, is their story. It's the story of every hot extraction, every desperate mission, every time someone came when called despite the risk. It's the story of why we honor veterans, not for killing enemies, but for coming for each other when it mattered most. That's the legacy. That's what endures.